Hi, everyone. This is the third in a series of three lectures on Phanerozoic climate, changes in climate over the last 550 million years. Last time, we talked about the Permian mass extinction, which was the biggest great extinction of all time, and the mystery about how it occurred. Next, we're going to be talking about the Mesozoic period, which is the time period immediately after the Permian mass extinction. And this period was, can broadly be called the dinosaur era. There were large, reptilish organisms throughout this entire period. I should mention that life on land was quite well developed before the Permian mass extinction. During the Carboniferous and Permian periods, land life did develop and became increasingly complicated, but by far the most complicated and diverse ecosystems were in the oceans. The focus for many paleontologists shifts at the end of the Permian towards land species because they started getting really huge and really interesting. Almost every kid knows something about dinosaurs. And so I'm not going to be talking about the dinosaurs themselves in particular, but in today's lecture, I want to talk about the end of the dinosaurs, the mass extinction that wiped them out. One thing I wanted to point out about mass extinctions, though, we've talked about that there were several over the course of the Phanerozoic. If you plot them on top of a map of temperature, the red bars here indicate the times of major extinctions. So end Permian, the Great Dying is this one, end of the dinosaurs is here. There's a few others along the way. And notice they don't have any obvious connection, maybe except this one, with major episodes of temperature change. Temperature seems to be rising and falling, and then organisms die for reasons that don't seem to be connected to that. That doesn't mean that climate change wasn't important for the end of these organisms, though. So let's focus our attention on the period right around 65 million years ago, which is the end of the Cretaceous period and the highlight of the dinosaur period. Generally speaking, the Mesozoic climate was warm-ish in the earlier part, rising in temperature to becoming really quite hot towards the end. And then maybe at the very end, there was a beginning of a cooling trend, and that cooling trend continues today with recent ice ages and that sort of thing. Ignoring, of course, human influences on climate, which totally don't show up on this graph. So let's focus at 65 million years ago. What was going on? Well, there were some gigantic critters living around here. Here's some, major dinos being excavated in Montana. But if you look at the rock record, there's a visible evidence of a dramatic change. There's a line in which, there's another spot in Montana. If you look at the rocks in this hillside down here, you find lots and lots of dinosaur fossils. Then there's this dark band, and the colors of the rocks shift, and there's no dinosaurs above here. There's not much of anything in terms of land organisms here for millions and millions of years of rock record. And there's just literally a line that you can see that's the dividing line between lots of complicated dinosaur fossils and no dinosaur fossils at all. It's almost instant. And this doesn't occur just in Montana, it happens everywhere around the world. One of the most noticeable and famous examples is in Italy. And here's that same line. It's tilted now because the rocks have been tilted. Here you see, this is in a marine sediment, so you see instead of dinosaurs, you see ocean organisms, giant shelled squid, huge shelly plant organisms. And then here you see only tiny, tiny little organisms. It's a total change in the fossils that you see here. And there's a line right there. This line has been enhanced by decades worth of geologists walking up to this particular field site and kind of scraping a little piece off to take a record for themselves, for their science, or for their personal benefit. But you can see it. Even on a microscope slide, there's this tiny boundary, millimeters thick, between total change of rock type between them and total change in fossil organisms there too. And most interestingly, right at that boundary, you see a spike in an element called iridium. Iridium is incredibly rare on Earth. You should look up prices for iridium sometime. It makes gold look cheap. It is incredibly rare on Earth, but right at this boundary, you see a spike of iridium, maybe 50 times as strong as the standard rocks. It's still not enough to mine, but it's quite a lot of iridium. And the interpretation of this is iridium is very rare on Earth's surface anyway, but it's very common in asteroids and meteorites and extraterrestrial objects. So the hypothesis is maybe this extinction was caused by a gigantic meteorite strike based on the amount of iridium that was there. There's more evidence than that. In some areas, you see quartz crystals that have experienced fracture due to supersonic shock waves. You see tiny little spheres of glass that would be created by a large impact that would vaporize and liquefy rock and blow it for large distances around. You start looking for these signatures, and they lead you in the general direction of Central America. You find more of these in the Americas, and you find more of them as you get closer towards Mexico. But these boundaries and these evidence of some sort of giant extinction event, change in fossils, are literally everywhere all around the world. So the hypothesis that we've had for decades has been that there was a big impact of a meteorite or comet that struck the Earth and caused this extinction. But the problem for many decades had been, okay, so where's the crater? Something big hit the Earth, there ought to be a big hole in the ground. It can't have disappeared yet because it would have been 50 miles across, 100 miles across. So people have been looking for where's the crater for years. And a couple of decades ago, 2004, we believe we found and identified exactly where it is, right on the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, in a place called Chicxulub. I'm probably mispronouncing that. In any case, it's mostly buried now, and a lot of it is offshore, making it difficult to distinguish. But you do see strong evidence for it, and measurements of gravity anomalies, which show the shape of the underlying rock underneath the sediment, show a clear circular structure right in this area. And this is where all that ejecta and stuff seems to have come from. So we think we've pinpointed the place where the meteorite struck. And the question that we still have is exactly, okay, there was a meteorite right at the exact right time, an extraterrestrial impact. But how exactly did it kill off the dinosaurs? And what was the mechanism? This is a really interesting story having to do with climate physics and chemistry. We believe there were probably gigantic global wildfires, like every tree on Earth caught fire simultaneously. That would have created dust and soot. Maybe that blocked out sunlight, prevented new plants from growing. This impact happened in an area where there's lots and lots of rocks containing sulfur. And if you blast those rocks into the atmosphere, you'll create sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere and cause acid rain. And maybe that could have had devastating consequences to organisms. It also would have vaporized a lot of rocks containing carbon, which would have formed carbon dioxide. So maybe you could have had a greenhouse effect from vaporizing all this rock that had CO2 locked up in it. So figuring out exactly how this happened is a big mystery, but we're pretty confident that it was in fact a giant impact that did them in. Any explanations for what exactly killed off the dinosaurs, remember, has to also work for ocean organisms too. There was a big extinction in the ocean and the land plants and animals simultaneously. And, you know, it's harder to explain both land and animal extinction simultaneously. In any case, many organisms, of course, survived: mammals, birds, frogs, turtles, all kinds of stuff, and diversified to form the Cenozoic period, which we are living in now. I just wanted to point out one sort of kind of little cool smoking gun of that it really was an impact that killed these animals. Here's a close-up of what are called tektites. These are small spears of rock that have been molted into glass as they fly through the air as part of an impact. And here are huge amounts of skeletons of fossil fish that have washed up on shore and then fossilized. And the scientists who did this study looked very closely, and they found these tektites just filling the gills of these fish. So literally we have evidence of a tsunami and tidal wave washing fish up on the land, and at the same time the little impact ejecta from the impact, all sort of putting together organisms that have literally died simultaneously. So in any case, the extinction of the dinosaurs and the end Cretaceous mass extinction was not the biggest mass extinction in the world, but it is a fascinating story. We're pretty sure it had to do with an asteroid impact. The exact mechanism by which the impact killed off both land and ocean animals is still a subject of intensive scientific research, and there's plenty to explore there. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening.